Hey everyone, welcome to the webinar today, and thank you to everyone who's here bang on time for the start of the session. We're going to have a few more people joining us over the next couple of minutes, so while they continue to join, I'll quickly introduce our guest for today, the always insightful, always balanced Mike Ryan from Smarter E-commerce. Delighted to have you with us, Mike. How are things with you and the team at Smarter E-commerce?
Oh, thanks very much for having me, by the way. Yeah, everything's good here. We've had a good Q1, very, lively, watching what's going on in e-commerce and AI and all this stuff, UCP, conversational attributes, what's coming next. So, always trying to stay on top of all the technology, not just AI Max, but
It's hard to keep on top of, man. We were just speaking before we switched the mics on that just an influx of news coming in, and like trying to stay up with the latest updates is it becomes harder week on week. But have I noticed on your website you've actually got a podcast called Growing
hmm,
E-commerce that you
yeah.
co-host. So I thought maybe you could tell people a little bit about that podcast and who you're gearing it towards.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I mean, it's geared toward like it's the intersection of those two words, growing and e-commerce. So it's really about marketing, performance marketing in particular for e-commerce businesses. So, I mean, our target audience are actual operators inside these businesses, but also anyone like, whether you're junior, senior, in-house or agency side, I think everyone can find something to learn out of that.
Yeah, for sure. And for anyone that is interested in checking out Mike's podcast, you can find the link to it in the Docs tab here on Goldcast next to the chat and the Q&A. And I'll be referring to the Docs tab in a few other places throughout the session today. But just to also quickly mention, on the small chance you're not already following Mike on LinkedIn, you can find a link to his LinkedIn profile in the Docs section. So you can give him a follow to stay up to date with all his latest experiments and insights, which I highly recommend you do because there's a lot of fresh data and insights coming out regularly. With that said, we've had a few more people join the session, and we've got a lot of content to cover today. So we're going to get going. So again, welcome everyone. Very glad to have you here, whether you're watching live or if you're watching back on demand. For those that don't know me, I'm James. I'm the content lead here at Lunio, and I'll be hosting the webinar today. We're aiming for around 50 minutes to get through the content. There is quite a lot to get through, a lot of really interesting stuff in relation to some of the testing Mike has been doing, but we will try and leave 5 minutes at the end for Q&A, which I'll say more about in just a second. But before I do that, I just wanted to bring this slide up on screen here and very quickly mention that we've got our next webinar on the Lunio calendar coming up on April 22nd. That is all about how to make Performance Max work better for B2B and lead gen. We've got a fantastic panel lined up for that one. We've got Sophie Logan, lead gen specialist and prolific event speaker here in the UK. We've got Julie Bacchini, another lead gen specialist and one of the most well-known voices in the B2B space when it comes to Google Ads. And lastly, we've got Andrea Cruz, who is head of B2B at Tenuity, which is a big agency based in the US. The idea for this session actually came off the back of an article that Andrea wrote for Search Engine Land earlier this year, titled Why Performance Max Looks Different for B2B in 2026. So she wrote, PMax for B2B depends on conversion signals, market size, and tolerance for automation. And her goal with that article is to help you learn what's worth testing when it comes to Performance Max for lead gen. Link to read Andrea's full article is in the Docs tab. And if you work in lead gen or you run campaigns for B2B clients, it's well worth signing up for this session. And the link to do so is at the very top of the Docs tab in Goldcast. So this will be a panel discussion webinar on April 22nd. We're going to have 4 or 5 key themes related to lead gen for PMax. And we'll be drawing on the real world experience of our panelists across the hundreds of accounts that they manage. So you can learn when and if it makes sense to scale up your investment in PMax for lead gen. I'm personally really looking forward to this one. I think it's going to be a great session, and it would be great to see some of you who are here in the audience today at that next session. That's enough for me on that. So I'm just going to stop sharing that and get into a few other bits of housekeeping before we get on to today's agenda. So as I can see in the chat there, we are recording the session today. It will be available to watch back on demand. So you'll get an email from Goldcast, and it will also be in the Lunio YouTube channel. If you have any questions about anything we covered today, please pop them in the Q&A chat tab, so they don't get lost in the chat. And we're going to try and get round to as many of those as we can at the end of the session. You can upvote questions you're interested in, which will help me prioritize which ones to ask Mike first. So please do make use of the upvote button. And as I said, we've also got lots of resources today in the Docs tab here in Goldcast, and I'll be directing your attention there at relevant points of the session today, so you can get more context, some of that data and research that Mike has put together that helps supplement and complement the content we'll be covering. Lastly, we're going to be covering a few audience polls during the session, which you can vote on. You should see a notification pop up whenever a new poll is open for responses, and you can respond by clicking on the polls tab and submitting your answer. On that note, we're going to bring up our first poll in just a second. So some of you may have seen this story, some of you might not have. It's very fresh, but essentially Search Engine Land released an article recently that announced, quote, Google is testing AI-generated headline rewrites in search results, describing it as a small, narrow experiment for now, end quote. So previously, these kinds of AI rewrites for headlines were only applicable to results on the Discover page, but this marks the first kind of this sort of testing within the traditional SERPs. Google has stated that this primarily impacts news sites, but isn't limited to them. And the stated goal is to better match titles to queries and improve engagement. If you haven't heard about that yet and you want to read more, there's a link to the article from Danny Goodwin from Search Engine Land in the Docs tab if you want to read up on that. But with that said, I just want to bring the first poll on screen here and get people's responses to it. And Mike, we were talking briefly before we switched on the mics about this news story. And while people are submitting their responses, it would be interesting to get your take on what you think about this test from Google.
I mean, I think the most concerning part to me is that phrase with no opt-out, but there I would just think about the fact this is a narrow test. They're saying, I hope and I assume that when this comes to actually a feature level, if it really gets that far, that they'll add an opt-out, because that's always my thing is like, you just need to control. I think Google, by and large, they've learned some lessons over the years, and I think they understand how sensitive it is to have an opt-out option. So that's what I would be watching here the most.
Nice. And I think from what I can see, the vast majority of the audience would be in agreement with your sentiment there, Mike. I think most people would feel that's quite concerning if there is no opt-out option. So thank you everyone for giving us your responses to that poll. And as I said, we will have a few more polls open throughout the rest of the session, which you will see a notification pop up. But we have now got our agenda for the main session today, which I'm just going to bring up on screen here. We've obviously got the 5 main mistakes that we're going to get into in detail. But before we skip straight into that, I think it's important to set the foundations first and make sure everyone is on the same page. Because as we said, things are moving so fast, it's really hard to keep up. So we're going to spend a little bit of time at the start exploring what AI Max actually is. And Mike is going to talk us through how it stacks up and compares against other automated campaign types and features within Google Ads, such as PMax Broad Match and the soon-to-be deprecated DSA campaigns, which we'll get into in more detail later on. And before we move on from that section, I've got a podcast to recommend that will be really helpful if you're interested in separating the hype from reality when it comes to the latest AI headlines, because I think there's a lot of noise out there right now being created by journalists who are not themselves computer scientists. And I think some of the reporting that's going on at the moment on the topic of AI can be quite misleading as a result. But anyway, I'll say more about that when we come to it. But after we've covered that broad top level view of what the state of AI currently is, and more specifically, how you should be thinking about AI Max and how it fits into your existing count, then we'll get into the 5 key mistakes. So the first key mistake is stacking overlapping technologies in the wrong way. So AI Max and PMax, for example, The second mistake stems from misunderstanding what AI Max actually does to match types. The third mistake is ignoring branded exact match interference. The fourth mistake is overestimating the incremental volume opportunity. And then the fifth and final deadly sin in this group of five is not setting up or maintaining AI Max effectively. And you'll want to stick around for that part of the session because Mike has an incredibly useful script that you can download and use for your AI Max campaigns to identify where sources of wasted spend could be stemming from. So big credit to Mike and the team at Smarter E-commerce for building that script because it's a massive value add. Then before we wrap up the content and move into the Q&A, we'll get Mike's kind of TLD or advice when it comes to how to actually approach AI Max in 2026 and whether it makes sense for you. Then we'll, as I said, move on to Q&A and we'll get through as many of those as we can. We're probably going to have more questions come through than we have time to answer. So please do make use of the upvote function in the Q&A. If someone else has asked a question that seems useful or applicable to you, please do give it an upvote because that is really helpful for me when it comes to prioritizing which questions to ask Mike first. So that's everything on the agenda. We're going to get into it first. So starting off with the basics before we go any further, Mike has already created the perfect piece of supporting content to go along with this webinar. Some of you may already have a copy of this guide if you follow Mike on LinkedIn and keep up with his latest releases. But for those of you that don't, this is Mike's ultimate guide for AI Max based on 1 year of testing across more than 600 accounts. It's clear a lot of time and effort has went into this. I think it's arguably one of the most comprehensive independent guides out there when it comes to AI Max and what the current state of it is. So you should definitely go grab yourself a copy via the link in the docs tab. You can either read it as a blog post on the Smarter E-commerce website, or you can download the full thing as a PDF, which I'd highly recommend doing. So Mike, if it's okay, I'm just going to quote a short excerpt from the opening section of the guide that you can see in the slide here. So it's just summarizing what AI Max actually is. So to quote, previously, Google focused on forcing existing campaign types into the Performance Max black box. This aggressive strategy included smart shopping, local display, and dynamic search campaigns. However, advertisers pushed back hard. So Google flipped the script for keyword-based search campaigns. Instead of bringing search to PMax, why not bring PMax to search? That's exactly how they introduced 3 core AI features to classic search. These include search term matching, customization, and final URL expansion. And AI Max for search, or for Google search, represents a fundamental shift in search advertising. It moves the industry away from keyword syntax and closer to pure intent matching. So with that foundational context done, Mike, I'm going to hand over to you here. Could you tell us a little bit about why you decided to create this guide and what the process was like of putting it together?
Yeah, I mean, I have written I wrote a pretty lengthy guide to PMax last year, and when I saw AI Max, the amount of attention that Google would be giving to it, I thought this is an area where we can probably get ahead and help people earlier this time than with PMax. So it is admittedly early, but I just felt like there's so many questions about what this technology actually is, what the features actually mean, what's going on, where Google's own documentation is either incomplete here or not independent. It's biased by their goals and motivations. And so I don't want to really be negative toward AI Max specifically, but I think that it's a new technology and it's worth understanding. And that's a big part of my job, is helping our clients, but I also try to help the market at large just understand Google's technology a bit better.
Nice. And yeah, really appreciate all your efforts on that front, Mike, because I think the whole community does benefit from you sharing the results of your experiments, not just with your clients, but with a wider market. And on that note, we've got a nice little helpful table from that guide showing how AI Max stacks up against PMax DSA and Broad Match. We've also got a nice little meme from the great Thomas Etchell as well, just because it tied in nicely here. But Mike, with reference to the key things people need to be aware of here when it comes to AI Max unique positioning within the Google Ads ecosystem, what would be the key takeaways you'd want people to take from this table?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you can see is that AI Max is the leftmost column there, and you'll see that it has a lot of overlap with other campaign technologies, which is not necessarily a great thing. But this the fact is that AI Max is in many ways a repackaging of existing Google features, like broad matches in there, DSA is in there, and a lot of PMax features are in there. It is PMax for search. That's even what it was originally called at one point by Google. But it's also a bit more than that. I think, in defense of the technology, it has some, they are keeping keyword targeting in there. It's designed to work in parallel to your existing search build, and really within that search build instead of next to it, the way that PMax is. And there are some pretty cool settings, particularly these ad group location settings, ad group brand settings that are rather unique. The search term match source, while it is sort of available for other campaign types, it's most relevant for AI Max. That's a very interesting report that Google built new for this. And also there's like these new synthetic keywords, which are for the time being exclusive to AI Max, and that's going to be a very relevant feature in the future. It's not available quite yet, but this will help boil down these lengthy prompts and these very long queries that people type in AI context. It will help boil that down into something that you can kind of understand and learn, maybe how can I target that. So
Got it. Nice. So if we move on to the next slide here, we've got a few different things. So I'm just going to quickly give people their bearings here before I pass over to you again, Mike. So on the left, you can see this post from Mike explaining why at the time of writing 4 months ago, he felt AI Max was not yet ready for prime time, which Mike will explain more about in just a second. And then on the right-hand side, we've got two different posts from Google Ads practitioners, one on Reddit, the other on LinkedIn, both expressing dissatisfaction and frustration with their early AI Max experiments for broadly similar reasons, namely a big increase in the amount of irrelevant traffic leading to a significant increase in cost per conversion. So, Mike, I'm just curious, you wrote this post 4 months ago, and as we've spoken about, things move quite fast in this space. Has your view changed much since back then?
Yeah, 4 months is a lifetime in this industry sometimes. But well, so in defense of AI Max, I think that it's much more mature as a product than, for example, PMax was when PMax launched. That really felt very half-baked. And AI Max has a much higher degree of like feature maturity. That you see these reporting and control that was in there in the left-hand table. PMax shipped with like almost nothing. But I think a big problem here is, and you see the very unflattering performance comparisons that other people are making. It's not only me that sees this. I think part of the concern here is that Google is setting different expectations there. They're setting this kind of impossible expectation, which we'll look at in more detail later, but that they can deliver extra value at a very similar efficiency. And this is, anyone in marketing knows that this is kind of, if you have at all a well-optimized setup, this is unrealistic. The other thing is that, something I've learned a lot about the campaign type and applying those controls in the meanwhile. And I think that AI Max, these problems are not unfixable. There are actions that you can take inside of AI Max. You can improve it, and that's the really positive thing here. But I was seeing, it's a very new technology. I've seen campaigns that have been turned on and not well audited or things like that. And people, I think, were not even aware of some of the problems that were occurring inside of AI Max. And I was just concerned that these are some of the default behaviors of AI Max.
Yeah, it's a solid point. And like you said, anyone who's been in marketing and if you're made a promise where you can have your cake and eat it too, you need to be wary of. So just in the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving forward here just because, like you said, Mike, there's a lot of stuff that people can do, and that's what we're going to get onto in the mistakes. But before we come on to those mistakes and get into what people can actually do, I just wanted to take a brief moment to highlight these two posts, one from Mike, the other from Inderai Paul, who is the paid media director at an agency called We Discover here in the UK. The reason I'm highlighting these specifically is because they both present a very fair and balanced take, and they both ultimately reach the same conclusion, namely, in this sea of noise and chaos about what AI is doing within the campaigns we're running, refocusing on the fundamentals is always a good idea. So to quote from Indirai in his post, quote, next time, before blaming the algorithm for poor performance, ask yourself, why is the algorithm behaving in this way? What signals are you feeding it? What commercial outcomes are you really trying to achieve? And are you really incentivizing the algorithm to deliver on that? And then to quote from your post, Mike, quote, while you do need to pay attention to the new things, you cannot forget the old things that are already up and running. Nailing the basics is more important in the months ahead, not less. So personally, I thought both of these posts make a really great point, and it was worth dwelling on for a second. And like I said, Mike, one of the things I really value about your content is that it is always fair. It's always level-headed. I think we could do with more of that in the industry. But before we move on, is there anything else that you'd like to hammer home to people here about avoiding getting caught up in hype cycles and staying focused on fundamentals?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a straw man argument that I put forward there in a way, but I was showing this like UI feature that's just been in beta for years, and but this technology will take longer to develop than most people imagine, and so in the meanwhile, I run into campaigns that are and accounts that are just not well optimized to begin with, and you can't start thinking about those next things if you haven't started addressing the fundamentals. And by the way, Indy is a longtime friend of mine and also well worth a follow on LinkedIn.
Nice, for sure. I actually met Indy for the first time at an event last year in Edinburgh, and yeah, great guy. Really enjoyed speaking to him, and he gave a great presentation at the event that we were at in Edinburgh. But anyway, to come on to the next point. So on this point of remaining fair and balanced, I just wanted to quickly, as I mentioned at the beginning, give this quick plug of this podcast, which I think is brilliant. It's called AI Reality Check. It's hosted by Cal Newport, who is a professor of computer science at Georgetown University and the author of multiple best-selling books, including Deep Work and Digital Minimalism. So Cal is someone who is a true technical expert when it comes to understanding the current state of AI in terms of where the potential lies, and what's just hype and nonsense designed to inflate the valuation of some of these big AI companies. So each week he dissects some of the most noteworthy headlines coming out about OpenAI, about Anthropic, about Google on the AI front specifically. And he's able to dissect and explain what's actually worth paying attention to. So in terms of finding a clear signal in the midst of all the AI noise that's out there right now, this podcast is fantastic. Obviously, this podcast is not dealing with performance marketing applications specifically, but I think if you're using one of these products, so ChatGPT, Claude, or Gemini on a daily basis, then this podcast is still highly relevant for you. So you can better understand the tech that you're working with. And also, if you're concerned about what the impact of AI might be on the job market, about your future career in marketing, I think Cal is a great voice to listen to here, because you're always going to get a fair and balanced take that's actually informed technically in terms of what the limitations and what this tech can and can't do. So this is an unpaid promotion. Cal isn't giving me a penny here, but I did just want to play a 90-second clip from the opening of one of his recent episodes to give you a flavor of what to expect on the show. So I'm going to play the clip now for everyone. So myself and Mike are going to disappear for 90 seconds, and we're going to reappear again once the clip is over. So with that said,
We've been told time and again that the massive large language models trained by companies like OpenAI and Anthropic are poised to utterly transform our world. We've been told that huge percentages of existing jobs are soon to be automated. We've been told that skills like writing and photography and filmmaking are all about to be outsourced. And we've been told that if we're not careful, the systems built on these models might someday soon become sentient and even threaten the existence of the human race. But here's the thing. One of the AI pioneers who helped usher in this current age is not convinced. His name is Yann LeCun, and he's been long arguing that not only will LLM-based AI fail to deliver all of these disruptions, but that it is, and I'm quoting him here, a technological dead end. People have started to listen. Earlier this month, a syndicate of investors, including Jeff Bezos and Mark Cuban, along with a bunch of different VC firms, raised over $1 billion to fund LeCun's new startup, Advanced Machine Intelligence Labs, which seeks to build an alternative path to true AI one that avoids LLMs altogether. After all of the hype and stress and hand-wringing around LLM-based tools like ChatGPT and Claude Code, is it possible that Jan LeCun was right, that those specific types of tools won't change everything? And if so, what's going to come next? If you've been following AI news recently, you've probably been asking these questions, and today we're going to seek some measured answers. I'm Cal Newport, and this is the AI Reality Check.
So there's a lot that we could say there, but that would be a very tangential sidebar conversation. But it's just my recommendation to people. If that clip was interesting to you, highly recommend that podcast. But now we're going to get into the first of our 5 main mistakes when it comes to AI Max. So this first one, stacking overlapping technologies. So we can see the post from Mike here on the screen showing that at the time of publication, 1 in 5 advertisers using AI Max were also using DSA. 1 in 4 were also using PMax, and half of them were using all 3. Again, the link to Mike's post documenting this in full is in the docs tab. But Mike, can you unpack for people, what are you concerned about here when you see accounts with all 3 of these running, or DSA and PMax used in combination with AI Max?
Yeah, I mean, you saw in the feature overview tab that there's a lot of feature overlap between these different technologies. And in some cases, you can have, you're kind of like triplicating the work that is being done. If you have all of these, if you put broad match in as well, I mean, you can really add, you can have like 4 technologies all doing very similar things or lots of overlap. And, you know, my concern is that this, I have several concerns, but this can do things like splitting up your data, because ultimately Google tells us that ad rank will decide which campaign is going to serve, or which technology inside of which campaign. It's all going to be solved by this magic thing called ad rank. And, you know, if we just take that at face value and accept the answer, the problem would be that it's unpredictable which technology is going to serve when. It should always be the best one, but you can have up to 4 different technologies, all kind of doing the same work as each other. So it's very redundant. To me, it's not good account hygiene. Again, when you're talking, like, we know that Google likes account consolidation. It likes nice consolidated conversions in different campaigns so that the algorithm has enough data to learn from, and it's unnecessarily splitting that. If the conversion could land in bucket A today, bucket B tomorrow, and bucket C the day after, you would never purposely build a system like that. So I think you also shouldn't just passively lapse into it either by just saying yes to all the technologies at the same time. It doesn't mean that you can't say yes to these technologies, but not everything all at once.
For sure. And so there are, in your take, there are specific instances where it might make sense to combine AI Max with PMax, but you just need to be careful about what you're doing there. Is that the case?
Yeah, if you listen to what Google has to say about this, they say that AI Max and PMax are perfectly complementary. And the best way that I could understand that is that, you know, AI Max still does have this level of keyword input, which is completely missing from PMax. You can add search themes, but you can't do any keyword targeting. But I'm still also a little bit worried about that overlap. But like, DSA, and if you're running a search campaign with DSA and you've added on AI Max and you're using PMax, this is really way too much. Something has to go. And it's probably, if you want to look toward the future, it's probably going to be DSA, but you need to have a strategy for how to manage that, because it's also not trivial to test when there's this level of kind of confounding going on, this confounding degree of complexity that's going on. Complicates testing, it complicates your measurement, your daily analysis. Your search term reports are extremely confusing. Search terms can be serving from 3 different things. It's way too much, in my opinion.
And to your point there, Mike, we know that DSA campaigns are going to be deprecated. I think Google have said Q2 2026 with no exact date given. But and to your point, if you are using DSA a lot, you kind of need to be preparing for the future and getting ready for a world where DSA is no longer part of your setup, right?
Yeah, it is. In e-commerce, I probably see about 20% of spend, search spend flowing through DSA, and that's not insubstantial. And it also there's a range there. Some accounts have quite a dependency on DSA, or it's very relevant to their revenue. So I definitely recommend, if you don't know what is your DSA share of revenue, find out, because Google is going to be sunsetting this technology at some point. And if you have a revenue dependence on that, then you need to start understanding now what to do. How does AI Max stack up? How can I manage this transition? Because, unfortunately, it'll probably come to a point where there's a ticking clock, and you don't want to deal with that then. You want to deal with it now.
100%. So definitely get your skates on if it's not something, if you're heavily reliant on DSA for revenue, like Mike said. So we're going to come on to a second mistake here. So mistake number 2, misunderstanding what AI Max does to match types. Some people think that AI Max adds an entirely new form of targeting. It does not. Instead, it effectively applies broad match logic to existing exact and phrase match keywords. Mike analyzed 1 million AI Max impressions, which revealed that AI Max broad matchifies exact and phrase match keywords with an average 80-20 split between exact and phrase match expansions, which you can see on the slide here. And Ginny Marvin's post, Google Ads Liaison, next to the data from Mike here, essentially confirms this, stating that if you already use a lot of broad match, the expansion impact will be smaller. If you already use DSA, you'll see less expansion from the keywordless side. Links to both the posts from Ginny and from Mike are in the docs tab if you want to read them in full. But essentially, the biggest impact is going to be if you predominantly use exact and phrase match. So, Mike, for those people out there, if they are currently heavily reliant on exact match from phrase match keywords, how should they think about whether or not to enable AI Max search term matching?
Yeah, I mean, well, from Google's standpoint, if you're a heavy exact match user, then this technology is for you. It's explicitly for you. That's what they want. But you could also just start by testing broad match as well. There's different ways about going about this. I myself was one of those people when this first rolled out. It was this term, search term matching. I was like, well, what is search term matching? There's a new match type showing up in the report called AI Max. What is this new match type? And this is exactly where you can report this in your own account. Go to report editor and add the search term match type and the keyword match type, and then you'll see the intersection of these things. That's how you can come to it. And I've, by the way, looked since at a lot more than 1 million impressions, and this insight holds true at scale as well. But I think as an exact match user, Google is giving you a big nudge here, and they're not going to quit on that. So I do think that if you haven't tried, it depends on what vertical you're in and on your specific business needs. And there will always be, in my opinion, some keywords that remain as exact match. That's okay. I think exact match will always have a use case. But I will say that broad match has improved a lot over the years. It was really the combination of broad match and smart bidding, which some people were skeptical toward at first, but this was kind of the big unlock moment for broad match where it really did start working. And this was some years ago. That's a technology that's moved along nicely. So I think you should think about Google's offer here, but it doesn't mean that you just have to turn on AI Max to your whole account or to a whole campaign. There are these ad group level settings, and you can test this carefully too if you want. You don't have to go all in.
Nice. That's a great point. In most cases, like if someone is one of those heavy exact match users, do you think in most instances it makes sense to start exploring the possibilities with broad match first before progressing to AI Max, or in some cases, does it make sense to go straight to AI Max?
Yeah, it's pretty tricky because broad match is here to stay as far as we know. I haven't heard anything about that getting deprecated. So I think you can try. I mean, it's a bit simpler to understand what's happening because if you turn on AI Max, like that's why it's called search term matching and not just broad match, because it has a broad match half to it and it also has a keywordless half to it. And the keywordless half is much like DSA and some of this other stuff. So it's more like what you see in PMax. So yeah, it could be a simplified way of testing. It's a very stable technology. I actually do, for whatever reason, see that broad match as a match type seems to perform better than AI Max as a match type. So it certainly could be a safer way to dip your toes in the water if you're not convinced by. Because I think Google's problem here is that they're saying this technology, the best users for this would be exact match users. But if you're still a heavy exact match user by now, you haven't taken up the offer in the past, there's probably a reason why. And I don't think you're going to be falling over yourself to test AI Max likely, but.
Yeah. We'll say a bit more about that because you've got 3 archetypes in terms of broadly the kinds of accounts that you see falling into in terms of buckets. So we'll speak more about that. But before we do, we're going to move on to mistake number 3. This one is fairly specific, but nevertheless an important point to make, namely that AI Max will expand branded exact match keywords into competitor search terms, a problem with significant commercial and brand safety implications. So in the excerpt from one of your posts that we can see on the top of the slide here, Mike, in one extreme example, you found that competitor brand terms accounted for 69% of total campaign impressions in one account. Usually it wouldn't be that exaggerated, but can you briefly explain why AI Max tends to prioritize competitor brand terms in this way?
Yeah, and I don't have like a benchmark for what is the normal thing here. I think there probably is no normal, but I'll just say this example wasn't cherry picked. This was the first account where I looked at this, where I tried to dig into this topic, and it happened to be like this, which is But in this case, like the whole premise of AI Max is that it will find traffic that you're not reaching currently. It'll find search terms and users that you're not reaching currently through your existing keyword targeting. It's an expansion layer. So, and since it's operating on a smart bidding model, it's not just going to look for anything. This stuff there should be demand here. It should be relevant traffic. There should be a conversion potential. And if you are not targeting competitor terms and you don't have them excluded, then it's very natural for this expansionary technology that's looking for new pockets of search volume to say, hey, I found this huge reservoir of search volume that's completely untapped. And it's competitor terms. So like in this account, they were purposely not bidding on competitor terms, but they didn't add it as account level negatives, these competitor terms. And so AI Max was not prohibited from doing this, and they weren't aware that it would or that it might. And I think it just thought, hey, I found the jackpot here, and it just started going in. And the traffic, in fairness, the traffic performed. But that was a strategic decision. They didn't want it was kind of a David and Goliath brand situation, and they didn't want to bother this other brand because the other brand will crush them for that. So that's the type of thing that's concerning to me.
Yeah, that's great. And that's why we've got Waluigi running around to the right-hand side here, because as Mike said, you need to set very clear rules with AI Max when it comes to things like competitor terms and brand bidding. Yeah. Otherwise, like you said, you could awake sleeping giants and people or brands with much deeper pockets than your own, which can create big problems. Just in terms of practical solutions, I know you mentioned account level negatives there, Mike. Brandless, could you talk about how they can work in practice here and what exactly to be aware of?
Absolutely. I mean, so in fairness, this is not an unsolvable problem. It's just a risk that some advertisers are not aware of, and so I want to raise that awareness level. But Google has solutions for this. They have brand lists, and brand lists are really great. It's a simplified way of tackling this exact thing without needing to use negative keywords. So you don't need to go crazy on negative keywords. Um, you know, because you have quotas on how many total negative keywords you can do and stuff like that. This is a very simplified kind of UI based thing. It's a more modern solution for this. And so you can use brand exclusion lists and brand inclusion lists, but this you can put your brand in there or other brands, competitor brands, whatever you want, and then you can dictate the behavior on that, and it will catch misspellings and typos and variants and things like that. So it's not perfectly leak proof, but it's a very simple way of tackling this problem. And again, it's available at the ad group level as well, which depending on how your ad groups are set up, you can then pursue more complicated logics there rather than doing this kind of like full nuclear option of a account level or campaign level exclusion. You can get pretty sophisticated with your build.
Nice. So with that said, we're going to move on to our fourth mistake, which is overestimating the incremental volume opportunity. And what you can see on the slide here are some claims from Google as to what AI Max is likely to deliver versus data that Mike has collated across 250 campaigns. And we're going to see how those two things stack up against each other. So Google's headline claim is a 40% uplift in conversions or conversion value at a similar CPA or ROAS. Mike, your data shows a 13% uplift in conversion value, but with a median 16% higher CPA. So it kind of gets back to what we were saying at the beginning of having your cake and eating it too. But can you unpack what's going on here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is again, we hinted at this earlier. Yeah, with having your cake and eating it too. There's this kind of saying that happiness is expectations minus reality, and I just don't think that Google is doing themselves a favor here with this marketing claim that they make. Because even if you look at other match types like or technologies like broad match, they don't make this claim that there's going to be a perfectly stable efficiency in relation to the volume. And that's broad match is in many ways the same technology. It's a huge part of what AI Max is. So why should AI Max through a magic wand behave differently? But you know, the positive here is that it does generate additional conversion value, and it's very similar to what Google says. But this is just the law of diminishing returns. It's unsurprising that these that this stuff costs more, and there could be also a sample bias here. Like the search campaigns and accounts that I'm looking at, it's not their first day of advertising. They're pretty well optimized. They've been advertising for a while. So I don't think that they have this totally untapped like pool of demand. That if you have a much more primitive build, you could see a much more positive outcome here. But I just want to have the realistic, mature understanding that yes, you'll get additional value, but it will come as a trade-off with efficiency. If you're happy with your current efficiency and you can support that in your average ROAS, then that's great. It's a win. But you have to understand that this segment of your traffic is very likely to be more expensive than other segments of your traffic or of your campaign.
That's a great point. So I'm just conscious of time here, so I'm going to skip to the fifth and final mistake here. This one can end up being unbelievably costly. So here we're talking about enabling AI Max and walking away, or assuming that AI means the campaign is going to magically self-correct and change course without any input from you and just telepathically understand what you wanted to achieve. Maybe we'll get there one day in the future, but we're certainly a very far away from that at the moment. And you shouldn't be lulled into a false sense of security by not understanding what the limits of this technology are and how they require you to adapt your approach as an advertiser. I'm sure many of you will follow Adrian Decker on LinkedIn. That's why we've called out his post on this slide here. He says, quote, "A lot of advertisers are struggling with AI Max right now, not because the feature is bad, but because they're running it like a regular search campaign," end quote. He then does go on to explain what's wrong with that approach in the rest of his post, which you can find in the docs tab if you want to read the full thing. And you'll also notice on the right-hand side of this slide, we've got the AI Max triage script built by Mike and the Smarter E-commerce team, which you absolutely should be using, as it's designed to help manage the search term and ad combination reporting problem, so you can take the right steps to stop your CPA from creeping up so much. So Mike, could you let people know where they can get that script and tell us a little bit about what it does and how you've been using it?
Yeah, I mean, our website is smarter-ecommerce.com. You can find it over there, or just Google for it. But triage is like, in medicine, they look for the patients who need the most help first. And I think it's a brilliant report that Google offers. They have this very cool report that shows you every combination of search terms, landing pages, and headlines. And that's really like the basis of your quality score. It's this relevance triangle between the search term, the landing page, and the ad. And so you have this great diagnostic layer inside of AI Max DSA as well. But the problem is if you're running decently scaled ones, decently scaled AI Max or search campaigns, these can generate tens of thousands of rows because it is a very granular view. So this script is just designed to very aggressively filter that and find the signal and the noise. So the ones that are performing really well, the ones that are performing really bad, and where there's a certain volume behind that. And it's just designed to take that potentially very large report and show you what actually matters in there.
Nice. So very briefly, we just want to mention as well the data that we're seeing at Lunio about AI Max in relation to IVT. The data on this slide is from one of our larger clients in the luxury retail space, where the entry level starting price for their products is around £500 here in the UK, all the way up to £10,000 on the higher end of their product range. This business had been using Lunio for more than 12 months prior to January 2025, and that had basically cut their average IVT rate for search in half across Google, from an average of close to 7% down to a baseline average of 3.7% after implementing Lunio. And from January to May 2025, we saw a relatively steady maintenance of that baseline average rate of around 3.7%. But then in May last year, this particular client took part in the open beta that Google ran for AI Max. And as part of that, AI Max was enabled on around half of their search campaigns. And this gave us the opportunity at Lunio to take a look at what impact that had on IVT rates. So in total, 895 search campaigns were included in this analysis. 404 of those had AI Max enabled. 491 of those did not have AI Max enabled. Our data science team performed some statistical analysis on both sets of those campaigns to assess the impact of enabling AI Max on IVT. And the findings are essentially what you're looking at on this slide, with average IVT rate moving from 3.7% to 5%, with highs of up to 6% recorded. So in short, a 35% relative increase in IVT exposure. So before I move on, I'd say if you are planning to enable AI Max and you've done so already and you're spending quite heavily in Google search, especially if you're spending over $1 million per year, it's well worth auditing your traffic to see what level of exposure you're dealing with, because ultimately, unless you look, you don't really know how big of a problem you've got. And then once you've got that data in hand, you can decide whether it makes commercial sense to try and address it. Depending on what industry and market you're in, an audit may reveal you're only dealing with 2% or less invalid traffic on search, which in most cases is going to be less of a concern. But if your average IVT rate is consistently hitting 5% or higher across search, there's usually a strong business case to be made to do something about that when you run the numbers using your average CPC, especially if you're in a vertical where your clicks cost quite a lot, and invalid clicks therefore stack up in terms of the losses more quickly. So if you are interested in auditing your traffic, there's a link to the docs tab in here. Our team will be on hand to follow up with you and get set up if that's something you're interested in. Also, if you want to know more about the impact of AI Max on IVT exposure, you can read our 2026 Global IVT report The link to download that is in the docs tab as well. We've got 10 minutes left, Mike, so I'm going to skip to this slide, and then we're going to move on to the Q&A. So this was the final slide. So there's a lot going on here, but the main thing, and we alluded to it earlier, are these kind of three main account archetypes, Mike, that you've identified in relation to readiness for AI Max. So we've got the exact match loyalists, we've got the hybrid pragmatists, and we've got the automation maximalists. So could you talk us through each of those three in more detail? We've kind of already touched on the exact match loyalists, but maybe if you could talk more about the hybrid pragmatists and the automation maximalists, and then also I'd be interested to know which of these buckets would you put yourself into?
Sure. I mean, yeah, and I think we also indirectly touched on the automation maximalists as well. If you think of those people where they're using broad match and DSA and PMax and AI Max, those are the people who they've fully opted into this, or they fully bought into this, and they're using all these technologies. And I think that's also why that distribution that we looked at earlier was that way, because a lot of the AI Max adopters are they're the early adopters of AI and automation. So that might be a pretty biased picture, but for now it's representative. So the people that we haven't talked about as much are these hybrid pragmatists, and yes, that's how I kind of identify as well. And this is someone who takes things case by case, is not dogmatic, is not afraid of AI, also doesn't believe every single last word that Google says about it, but rather just tests, follows the data, follows the numbers, the learnings. So that, I'm biased toward that viewpoint, as you can probably tell a little bit. I think that's a good place to be in the year 2026. But yeah, as I've said there, the automation maximalists, I mean, the funny thing is they're probably most enthusiastic about testing this out, but they have the least to gain because they're already covering a lot of this traffic that AI Max will cover through different means. And the exact match loyalists, they have the most to gain, but they're probably the most resistant. So the hybrid pragmatists, I think, are, that's where you're going to see hits and misses, and just follow the data, see what it tells you. My message to everyone, though, is that I don't want to demonize AI Max nor be a salesperson for it, but I think it's at a point where we see Google is going to be pushing this. DSA is an important technology to a lot of people. Maybe you want to try testing it. That's really my advice to everyone, is do try testing it. That doesn't mean you have to love it. It doesn't mean you have to switch 100% of your account, but give a look at it and see what the data comes back with.
Nice. That's a great point to wrap on for the content, I feel like. So with the time we have left, we're going to address a few of the questions from the Q&A tab. Sure. We may, just to let people know, we may end up running over by 5 minutes or so, but hopefully that's okay. But I'm just going to look at the Q&A tab here, and I'm going to filter by the questions with the most upvotes first. So the top most upvoted question comes from Linda, and she asked to make sure we are eligible to show up in AI overview / AI mode. Do we have to also opt into URL expansion and text customization? I've heard 2 different responses, but no one can confirm. Is there anything you can shed light on there, Mike?
I mean, one thing I would say is that to show up in AI overviews and AI mode, you don't need to use AI Max at all. You can show up there using broad match, and that's in Google's documentation. So, broad match doesn't even have final URL expansion. It does have like a form of automated create assets or text customization, but no, I don't. Again, I'd also have to check with Google to give you 100% sure answer, but I do not think it's necessary to opt into those features specifically. I think this is much more about that broad match part of the technology. What what they're telling us is that classic keyword targeting is not eligible for as an AI mode. So if you're running whether you're running a traditional search campaign or one where you've activated AI Max, it's going to be the broad match or the broad matchified part. And this could be a business case for AI Max in the future. If that, because right now you have to remember that stuff is very small. But if it's getting big one day, then AI Max could really help your standard keywords appear in those other contexts as well. But I just want to, again, remind people that this is small for now, and this is a setting that as of today applies to your entire campaign, not just your AI surfaces and stuff. So don't let Google hype or pressure you on the AI surfaces part. That's tomorrow. That's in 6 months from now, where that's going to become a lot more relevant, especially here, talking, I think, largely to a European audience. But yeah, so I would really focus on the impact on your total campaign and account.
Nice. So we have our next question here from Joe, which reads, does AI Max have a place in smaller accounts with tighter budgets? Arguably, could having more exact match targeted keywords work better? What would be your response there?
I think the answer could definitely be yes, that your exact match will work better there. I mean, it depends how tight we're talking here with tight budgets, but Google is clear that you should not be limited by budget to use AI Max. If you have a limited by budget status, AI Max is not for you or not going to work as expected. And you ideally, I think from their perspective, you should have an open or unlimited budget to use it. But of course they say that. But yeah, it's an expansionary layer, and it should really, in that sense, kind of come after these other things. And so, if your budget's really tight, I would actually prioritize those traditional things first. Yeah, and again, especially if you're limited by budget.
Nice. Yeah, it would be great if we could just, spend endlessly and didn't have to worry about Google eating into margins year on year. But anyway, that's a conversation for another day. Next, most upvoted question we've got from Adrian. So are you saying PMax and AI Max can't work together? If so, how would you structure an account for an e-commerce client? So I think you said it earlier that they can work together. So maybe just going into a bit more detail about what that looks like.
Yeah, I don't want to say that they can't work together. And one thing that you can do, by the way, is look at your PMax campaigns. You can go to the newish channel report, and then you can see how much of your campaign volume on PMax is actually running through Google search. And bear in mind that will be both the DSA and the RSA type things that PMax can do. But so the specific conflict here comes with the DSA part of PMax, like the final URL expansion and stuff, and what AI Max is doing. And it's possible that there's just not that much impressions and not that much revenue that PMax is doing there. And in which case, I don't see a huge conflict here. It's also, what I want to say there. I also see like little risk of, for example, a CPC escalation or CPC wars or something like that, because my problem is more with PMax and shopping, for example. There's very little to differentiate the ads besides the bid, because they're working with the same titles, the same feeds, the same landing pages, the same product images and stuff like that for the most part. And so there's very little to differentiate besides the bid. In the case of AI Max and PMax, the search part, since they're dynamically doing a lot on the ad and everything else, all the other components, the ad rank can be about a lot more than just the bid. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. So, but if PMax is doing if a lot of search volume is occurring on PMax, which can happen, then you need to be more mindful about that.
Nice. So I think we're coming up to our allotted time. So I'm just going to give time for a couple more questions here, and then we'll kind of wrap up the session. But we have got a few more questions which have received quite a few upvotes. So I do want to prioritize those. So our next most upvoted question is from James. What happens when AI Max is enabled with text customization and final URL expansion turned off?
Then you've killed the DSA portion of AI Max, and it would just be doing the broad match part. So you'd be basically adding a broad match layer to your campaign at that point.
Nice and straightforward answer there. So we've got the next most upvoted question from Danielle. Could you share some guidelines for a future-proof account setup with AI Max, PMax, demand gen, these kind of more automated campaign types that Google is inevitably going to continue to be pushing, if not shoving advertisers towards over the coming 12 months?
Well, that's Google's Power Pack. So until they name it something new at Google Marketing Live in May. But yeah, I mean, these are this is a big question kind of, but in principle, these are covering different parts of the funnel. And my main advice has to do with PMax and demand gen. I'm an advocate for letting demand gen be demand gen and be more mid-funnel and upper funnel oriented, and not putting too much performance pressure on it. It should be driving demand and search lift, like brand search lift and all this kind of stuff. So Google now is pushing it gradually toward more of a performance direction, but I feel like it has such a conflict at that point with the asset part of PMax, because it's not only AI Max that has massive overlaps. It's everything that's Google is building right now. They're all overlapping. It's a bit odd of a strategy, but yeah, I don't know. It's a big question to answer in detail now, but I've done webinars about the Power Pack before that you can check out too. So, or reach out to me on LinkedIn. We can talk about it more.
Nice. Yeah. Check out Google Power Pack, Mike Ryan, Smarter E-commerce. You'll find some useful information there. So this is going to be our final question, Mike, and then we'll just say a few closing words before we wrap up. So this final question, would you only run AI Max if you had certain bid strategies implemented that limit the algorithm, like target CPA or target ROAS?
I would 100% put an efficiency target in place. Yes, I don't think it's wise to run your campaign with no efficiency, because broad match works well with smart bidding, but even better when there's an efficiency target in place. And this has got to be true of AI Max as well. I would be a little fearful of where it might go and the things it might do. If you want to take an approach, like if AI Max is not aggressive enough for you, or you want to take another approach, there's also the smart bidding exploration feature, and that is something that you could also explore. But personally, it would be a little scary for me right now to let AI Max do its thing with no ROAS target or no CPA guidance.
Yeah. So wise words to finish on there. We'll need to wrap it up there so we don't run over for time too much. But massive thank you to everyone in the audience today submitting questions. Big thanks to you who upvoted the questions as well and helped us prioritize the ones that most people were interested in seeing. And of course, big thanks to Mike for joining us today and sharing all your insights with us on the testing you've been doing. Before we finish, Mike, is there anything else you'd like to say or let people know about?
No, I mean, thanks very much for your time and attention. Definitely check out the guide that's linked in the docs, and don't be shy. Reach out to me. I'm happy to be in touch.
And likewise, if you have any questions for us, you can contact me directly via james.deeney@lunio.ai, and I'll be happy to help, or I can point you in the right direction if I can. As I mentioned before, if you're interested in auditing your AI Max campaigns to find out their average IVT rate, you can click on the links in the docs tab and our team will be there to help you out. And of course, big thanks to all you tuning in, whether you're here for the live session or if you're watching back on demand. And we hope to see you again at our next webinar coming up on April 22nd. Again, all about how to use PMax more effectively for lead gen and B2B. Don't forget to sign up for that. We got a great panel. The link to sign up for that is in the docs tab if you haven't done so already. But for now, take care, guys, and all the best with your AI Max experiments this year. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.